We have so many stressors in our lives that are impacting our bodies. They're impacting the way we show up and how we engage with life every single day. And so it's not just stress as in like work is really stressful or the kids are being really stressful or like somebody died or the house is burning down or like whatever. It's like those are definitely stressors, but there's these micro stressors that are happening all the time. So for women living out of alignment with your cycle, so you just living in this 24-hour rhythm kind of thing every single day, that's a stressor. That adds stress to your body because your body is trying to function as it's supposed to, right? It's supposed to have this 28-day rhythm, this monthly rhythm, but you're telling it needs to operate more in this 24-hour rhythm. So it's causing a little micro stress all month long. All right, welcome back to this episode. Super excited to dive into this episode. It is a little bit more spontaneous and not something that I necessarily was planning on recording, but I posted a reel on Instagram recently. And there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of people wondering how I've been able to get rid of the massive mood swings and like crazy irritability and unproductivity around that time around my period. So I figured I actually tried to record a small little video and was like, there's no way that I can get into all the details and like all the information and I couldn't even do it in 1 minute. It was 3 minutes. So that is what this episode is going to be about. I want to dive in today around how I was actually able to take those massive extremes of my period week or like the week before and kind of get them to the place where now I don't even really recognize that they're happening. Everything feels much smoother. Everything feels so much easier. Not going to lie, there are still some months that I do notice that and it does get extreme, but I can always tell you why. Like I always know what it was that made that shift and why I noticed those extremes so much. So that's what this episode is going to be. I'm going to put it out there, just like medical disclaimer, like this is not medical advice, right? So find your doctor, talk to your doctor, get their perspective and their feedback. This is just my story and what has worked for me, what I've seen happening in the space in the women's health area and what I've seen other people doing and what is really making such a difference. So backstory, I had incredibly irregular periods for my entire life. When I say incredibly irregular, I mean like 40 days, 60 days, 30 days, 15 days, like all over the board. They were incredibly awful, all over the place. And I probably would have told you I would love to get rid of my period and never have a period ever, ever, ever again until I started wanting to become pregnant. In fact, the first time I became pregnant, I didn't even really know I was pregnant because my cycle was so irregular. I had no idea. And I was in grad school and then got pregnant and miscarried. So then after that, got pregnant shortly after that with my oldest. And then between my oldest and all of my other kids, there was a span of maybe 5, 6, 7 years, somewhere in there, that I was either pregnant or breastfeeding, had very few cycles actually in between there. And then after my last baby, everything got so much more regular. My cycles were so much regular. And the story kind of goes that I was breastfeeding my youngest, and she was probably about 2 years old. And it was like towards the tail end of breastfeeding that I kind of had planned on. And I had learned about cycle syncing and learned about how our cycles are so empowering and so helpful for us when we look at our work and our business and things. And I remember asking the person that shared it with me, I'm like, how does this even work? I'm breastfeeding. I don't have a period. And she had said you could follow either the moon or you could start like listening to your body and kind of trying to figure out where you're at, like where those rhythms are. And the week that I could pick and pinpoint was that week of my luteal phase. I would get extremely emotional, extremely triggered, feeling totally all over the board. I remember like vividly getting mad and angry at my husband, like throwing a shoe at him down the hall and like just like rage. Like I will admit that I'm one of those people that on the Enneagrams and things like my default, whatever is like anger. I get frustrated. I remember growing up as a kid, my dad and I would get in these huge, like yelling, fiery matches. that's just my response. And so you add that response in with all of these emotions on top of it, and it became intense, like crazy intense. And so much so that it kind of felt like an out of body experience. Like when my emotions would get that high, it didn't feel like I had any control over them. It felt out of my zone. It felt out of control. That is how bad some of these got. You may have heard this story before when we were on our 10-year anniversary trip in Hawaii. And it was my breakdown moment, my moment where I literally got out of the car, like slammed the door shut, started walking down I remember it was like cornfields or sugarcane fields or something. Like there was not corn, obviously, in Hawaii, like sugarcane or something, like these tall lined road. And I got out and I was like, I'm done. I'm not going home. My kids can go home with Joe. He can manage, he can raise them on their own. I am starting over right now. I'm not doing this again. And that was at my lowest point. And while I can't tell you, I can't look at my calendar and tell you that's exactly what phase I was in, but I can almost guarantee that that's where I was at, because it was such an extreme emotion and such extreme, like, low point, that while I had all these other things in my life that were confounding and adding on to that, it made those moments when I was in that luteal phase so much more extreme, so much more intense. So for me, what happened was that after I started learning about my cycle and actually learning about how my body changed and shifted, honestly, I will say that that's the number one place I started, was just awareness. And once I started that awareness, like once that person told me, like, start noticing where your body's at and just start trying to track and start trying to lean into that, that's what I started with. Literally as simple as like awareness of what was happening in my cycle and how can I sync up my life with that to whatever extent it was. Like it was probably very minimal at that point in time. And was just like, can I give myself a little bit more grace when I start to get into that phase, when I know my emotions are going to get higher? Can I adjust my life in any way? Can I support my body in any way? Can I push harder in those other phases when I can push harder, but then actually lean back in those other phases? And I kid you not that within 2 months of doing that, my cycle was back. I had the most regular cycle I've ever had since then. The only hiccup in the middle of that, so she's 7-ish now, almost 8. So the only hiccup between, and basically in the last 6 years, has been COVID. COVID definitely threw a wrench in the regularity of my cycle and how things are feeling. But otherwise, my cycle has been incredibly regular. And so over the time, I've definitely added in other things that have helped me regulate my hormones and helped support my hormones better and helped me honor my body. And it all really comes back to, like, when I recorded this Instagram reel and I tried to make it like super simple and super easy, it all comes back to stressors. We have so many stressors in our lives that are impacting our bodies. They're impacting the way we show up and how we engage with life every single day. And so it's not just stress as in like work is really stressful or the kids are being really stressful or like somebody died or the house is burning down or like whatever. It's like those are, yeah, definitely stressors, but there's these micro stressors that are happening all the time. So for women living out of alignment with your cycle, so you just living in this 24-hour rhythm kind of thing every single day, that's a stressor. That adds stress to your body because your body is trying to function as it's supposed to, right? It's supposed to have this 28-day rhythm, this monthly rhythm, but you're telling it needs to operate more in this 24-hour rhythm. So it's causing a little micro stress all month long. And then we add in other things like nutrition. I think that was probably another really big one that made such a huge difference for me and changed the way my hormones were showing up. That was right around the time that I started my health journey. And so when my first baby was born, I changed a lot of things that we'll talk about, like too, is in terms of like toxins in cleaning products and toxins in our environment and toxins like around our house and things like that. Like I'd gotten rid of plastics, most of them, and I'd gotten rid of most of my cleaning supplies and had switched to more of a natural organic sort of one. Like I had done a lot of those other things that are considered endocrine disruptors and toxins that change the way our hormones function. I'd already done a lot of that. But the biggest change that happened after I had my youngest was that was when I started my Beachbody journey. And so that's when I started my business. I started my Beachbody. I started my health business. And so I switched a lot of the foods that we were eating. I was making sure that we were having well balanced, like vegetables. We were limiting a lot of the sugars, eliminating a lot of the processed foods. We were trying to eat as much grass fed as possible, all of those types of things. And then, like, slowly, like I said, over the years, we've added and shifted and changed it. And some of it, like, I was all gung ho on initially. And then, like, we're probably a little bit lax on the sugar around this house. Like, my youngest is the most of sugar addict in the world. So it's not that I follow everything rigidly. Like, I watched a Instagram reel just recently and she was talking about like everything in her house that she does that's like endocrine supporting. I would not describe myself that way. I would not describe myself as somebody who is consciously, cognitively, intentionally, always, all the time making sure to follow up with my hormones. Like, I have learned that for me, the best way to do it is to listen to my body, like understand the language of my body and learn the things that are bothering my body. Learn the things that send it to be triggered or send it to be like send those hormones out of whack or whatever. And so all of those other things, like all those other stressors, all of those other layers that I've added in over time to help minimize the stress that's on my body has definitely made a difference in my hormones. But if I were to go back and look at the very beginning, really, truly, honestly, I think the biggest thing that we can do is just having the awareness of our cycles, having the awareness that there are times of month that you do need more support. Your body does need things that are differently. Last night, actually, track my sleep every day. And I've been watching my sleep just kind of continues to get like more and more. I'm like, I'm sleeping like 8.5 hours at night. It's like my body needs that. And I now am giving myself the permission to do that and giving myself the grace and not making a big deal about it. And knowing that in certain phases, I might be able to get up earlier. In certain phases, I might not be able to. And that all of those micro changes that I do are minimizing stress. So when we look at our life and we look at all the things that we're doing, is like, how can we minimize stress and increase regulation? How can we support our body? Right? Breath work, meditation, going for a walk, being in nature, all of those things are going to help your body regulate, minimizing stressors like, doing even a high intense workout is a stressor. And so when we do those stressors in phases when your body needs nurturing, it's causing unnecessary stress. So eliminating stress at certain times, like there are certain times of the month when your body can handle stress much better. So when that estrogen is high and your body is feeling primed and ready, it's the time you want to be imposing all of those stressors, like not like good stressors, right? Like there's good stressors and bad stressors, but like working out or cold plunging or working hard in your business, like all of those things, like your body can handle it and manage it so much better. And then when you hit that luteal phase and your body can't handle the stressors that much, that's when you want to be able to honor your body and be able to support your body. And I think for me, if we were to, like I said, put it in a simple possible word we could do, it would be just that. Like, just allow yourself to sync with your cycle and know that you're not the same every single day. And that when you do that, that's when things minimize. Like when I'm working with clients and I notice like they're extremes, right? Like they get these really high bursts of productivity and these really low dips of like moodiness and unproductive and feeling like they just want to hide out in the world. Oftentimes that tells me that they're not in alignment with their cycle or that they haven't been doing it long enough. Because if that's extreme, their body is still feeling massive shifts. For me, over the last, like, there is plenty of months that I go through each of the different phases and I do notice shifts. I do notice, like, hey, I don't feel as much energy right now, but it's not these massive extremes. It's pretty mellow. It's like evened out. But there are months when I still feel that, when I still get to the place when I'm like, I'm triggered. I don't want to do it. I want to like hide out, leave me alone. I can't do this anymore. And when I look back at that month or the month prior, because sometimes our hormones take a little while to catch up to like life and like the stressors that our life is imposing sometimes takes a little while to see and manifest in the way our cycle shows up. So sometimes it's not even like directly, I'm stressed right now, but maybe it was like a stressor the month prior. But usually when I'm feeling super triggered or feeling super overwhelmed, I can identify exactly what it was. I was in the middle of launch or we were on vacation. Like even right now, as I record this, technically my app shows that I have not ovulated yet when I should have ovulated probably like 5 days ago. And when I look at that and I look at like when I'm recording this, it's like end of January ish. Last month was Christmas time. We were traveling. There was lots of stuff going on. There was lots of things we were doing. And so those stressors impact the way my cycle is showing up this month. And if I'm not paying attention and I'm not honoring that next phase is when things get crazy and things get wild. So this was kind of a really roundabout way to say like the stressors that you have in your life are impacting your cycle. And if you pay attention to where your cycle is and help support the stressors with where you are in that cycle, you'll see that those extremes minimize. They're not as large, they're not as big. And it can be as simple as just awareness and then layering in things over time as you feel comfortable with it. Like, I don't feel like you have to go out there and overhaul your entire life, everything you eat, everything you work out, everything in your business, everything in the way you sleep. Like, we could literally everything's impacted by our cycles. We could overhaul everything, but you don't have to overhaul everything if you know what things are making the biggest difference for you. What are those bigger indicators that are going to make the shift? And when you know those ones and you lean into those, then the other ones don't matter. So clients that come to me and they're like, I work a 9 to 5 job. How is this going to work with me? Well, maybe we don't work on the 9 to 5 job. Like we can down the road. And I would love to see women being able to modify their work schedule based around their cycle in a 9 to 5, but society, we're not maybe there. It depends on your employer. But maybe that's not where we start. Maybe we start with something else. We start with one of these other factors that's going to really impact the way your body's managing the stress and the stress load and being able to shift that so that you feel like you have a little bit more homeostasis. So, as an occupational therapist, what we know in the field of regulation and dysregulation is that our bodies have thresholds. So we have like when I worked with kids in pediatrics, we called it like a just right zone of regulation. So there's this like bar of threshold of where if we operate within this threshold or in this zone, we feel okay. We feel good. We feel like we can manage our days. We feel like we're even keeled, like life feels good, life feels great. When we drop below that just right state of regulation is when we start to feel like we're dragging. We don't have enough energy. And as balanced and semi-regulated people, we understand we've figured out things that'll help bring our bodies back up into that regulated state, whether they're helpful or not. Like in long term, like coffee might be one that brings you up, but brings you up maybe temporarily, may not be the greatest choice, but we find things that are going to help us regulate. When we get into the above that just right regulated zone is when we start to feel triggered. We start to feel overwhelmed. We start to feel out of balance. We start to feel out of whack. And so we need to have the tools and the systems that are going to help bring ourselves back into that just right zone all the time, right? So that's just like our functioning and like how we show up every single day. So a lot of this is all intertwined in being able to help us, like, how can we support your body being as regulated as possible? How can we support your body and nourish it and support it, like with the breath work, with water? Like most people are not even just drinking enough water, enough movement, enough like decreasing those stressors and those toxins and those other loads that we're putting on it. And so there's so much, right? It can get you into this place of feeling like there's just not enough, like I can't do enough. But like I said, I will go back. If I looked at where I started and the shifts that I noticed immediately within that first year of making only slight changes it really came back to this is like, how can I just bring more awareness to where my cycle's at every day? So if you walk away from this episode doing one thing, it's understanding where your cycle's at throughout the month, understanding how you can support it and what those big things are that you can help shift. And then just start taking small little pieces. Like maybe you eliminate the household cleaners that have endocrine disruptors in them. Maybe you eliminate processed foods. Maybe you start trying to cut back on sugar. Maybe you just increase your water. Maybe you add more vitamins in. Maybe you make sure that you're getting enough calories throughout the day, right? Like a lot of women probably aren't even getting enough of the right calories in the day. When you don't have enough of the right calories in the day, your body starts to attack itself and it's not going to operate in the hormones that are in the right way either. So like there's so many factors, but it all comes back to, how can I support my body and how can I minimize stressors? We're not going to get rid of all of them. And some of them we need at certain phases of our cycle, but can we reduce that stress load on our bodies? How can we bring ourselves back into a state of physiological, neurological, nervous system, sort of like regulated state? And I guarantee you'll start to see those massive shifts of, well, I can't guarantee, right? No medical claims, like that you'll see things mellow out. Things won't be quite as extreme. Most of the extremeness comes from living out of alignment with your cycle. So if you want to mellow those and bring that back into alignment, it comes back to just supporting your body, nourishing your body, seeing your body as the vehicle that's taking you to where you want to go, and asking yourself, how can I support my body better today? How can I support and honor my body each and every single day? And you'll see lots of different hormone experts out there with different things that you can do and add in, like red light therapy and, castor oil packs and all those. And they all may be wonderful and great. I can't tell you that I've done them. So while they may work and they may be very helpful, I don't think that they all are what we have to be doing in order to support our hormones. Like there's lots of different ways that we can do that to help minimize those effects. So anyway, that is enough for this episode. I will see you in the next episode. Please reach out to me and let me know what you're taking away from this episode, what you're going to implement, what thing is going to shift and change for you. And then I will see you in the next week's episode. Bye. Alrighty, friend. It was such a pleasure to hang out with you today on today's episode. I cannot wait to do it again with you next week, so save the date. We'll meet here again. Until then, if you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on the podcast, letting us know what you love about this podcast. After you do that, submit a screenshot of that to support@renaefieck.com, and you will be entered in to be able to have one of our free spots inside of Your Cycle 101, our foundational program, letting you know the ins and the outs of how your cycle impacts you every single day. Alrighty, friend, I will see you next week.